Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast. We are chatting today about how to create a coaching culture. And one of the things that I believe is so important about a coaching culture is that it is all built on relationships and on trust. And when we build relationships in trust, sometimes it comes in really funky ways. And so on the podcast with me today as a guest is Damon Clark. And if you have not met Damon before, we do have 2 other podcast episodes with Damon. So Damon, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me back.
Absolutely. Okay. So if you've not met Damon before, Damon and I met in person for the first time last April, and we've been working together for about 2 years before that through being partners with the predictive index. And so I walk into this conference and I see Damon, and Damon, tell me about when we met.
So first of all, we've been working, not only have we been working together for around 2 years, we are pretty much working together every single week at some point. And so I was so excited about seeing you. And, the pandemic happened and we would talk virtually and we'd have meetings every week. And so we went to the big conference, Optima, Predictive Index conference, and I couldn't wait to meet you. And suddenly I bump into you and you just look at me and just said, Damon, hold my bags. I just need to use the bathroom. Just ran off. And you just disappeared. And that was it. That was the first time we met in person, which is typical Tracy, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But the other side of that, of course, is the fact that, there's times where you just have to go to the bathroom and you're doing that dance. And there we go. So how does this little story align to a coaching culture? It has to do with trust, right? And so often we're having conversations, especially in a virtual environment, and we get so much of this pushback saying, hey, you can't build trust in a virtual environment. And I 100% disagree with that, because a relationship is built on those conversations and specifically on that trust.
Yeah, I coincidentally, and I can't remember if we talked about this before, but working with you at Predictive Index as your partner on the client side, you're the only partner I had an argument with as well. And it was a really good example actually of healthy conflict. I can't even remember what it was about, but it was really constructive and positive and honest and raw. And I think that's part of the reason why, we're quite close and we get on so well, is because we do trust each other, which means we do have the ability to be very honest and raw and open with each other, which is a good example, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't remember what that was about either. But what I do remember is that it was something that happened that had a negative impact for me and my business. And I was like, oh no, that is not happening. Right. And you're like, I didn't even realize that happened. And so, as we kind of got into it and untangled it, it was, hey, we knew the trust with it was there, of the intention that we're both here, to serve the clients and to move things forward. So it was really easy to kind of overcome that, to move forward, because that trust was always there. And again, conflicts are so incredibly important in every single relationship, because you're going to have multiple competing priorities. And when we start to look at coaching and creating that coaching culture, it is, I know that I have to be okay with conflict, but there's healthy conflict. And how do we do that? And how do we coach to up-level folks, knowing that we are in agreement with the mission, vision, values. We are in agreement and in integrity with what we're doing.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm a big 5 behaviors fan, and so are you. And yeah, absolutely. Being able to have that trust avoids that silent disagreement, which destroys teams. And is super important in building high-performing teams.
Yeah. So for our listeners listening in that are going, hey, what's 5 behaviors? Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Absolutely. So 5 behaviors is from a Patrick Lencioni book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it's one of my favorite business books. And the reason being is it's so easy to read because it's in a kind of fictional story about a Silicon Valley tech company. So it's a really easy read, but it's basically built on the premise that if you have trust, you're able to have healthy conflict. And if you have healthy conflict, you're more likely to get commitment. And if you get commitment, you can hold each other accountable and get better results. So it's a great model. And interestingly, it's also available in a kind of assessment, which makes it really easy to cascade and build in to your business, which I love. That's what I love about it.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think what's so important is just understanding what creates healthy teams and what doesn't, right? And in coaching, essentially what we're doing is we're saying, hey, how do we be self-aware enough to step into, these behaviors to meet the business outcomes, but also to meet the job that is at task right now? And, one of the things that I say all the time is we hire people for what they know, yet we fire them for who they are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's like, all right, so if we're firing people for who they are, why don't we figure out who they are up front and have really clear expectations of how we expect them to act in the workplace? And hint, hint, this is your culture, right? So, I guess I'm curious, Damon, how do we create, a coaching culture inside of an organization?
Yes. So I think we're naturally progressing towards that conversation as we speak here. So, I can move back to Patrick Lencioni's 5 behaviors here. We now have the ability to roll out at scale, really easy and cost-effective solutions. So I think if we go back to HR learning development historically, typical programs, learning and development programs or coaching programs were often just reserved for the executive team because they're expensive. And the executive team would go to a retreat or an offsite and they'd receive half day or full day's training through a consultant. And the challenge was that would be difficult to replicate further into the organization due to cost. And so typically what would happen is managers and directors would be left to compile their own program or their own coaching methodologies with various success and inefficiencies. And so that was really much the kind of old way of doing things. But nowadays we've got a lot better tools to help us roll out these programs at scale.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about programs, we've got the information on the 5 behaviors, and I think a program that you and I both use a lot in our business is Predictive Index. And not that this podcast today is all about PI, because it's not, but it's really looking at and saying, in order for us to build a coaching culture, we need to ensure we have strong relationships that are built in trust. We need to ensure that when we see something, we're saying something, and we have some tools in our tool belt of really asking some questions of individuals that has them think into what is the unintended consequences of the behavior I just had, or, hey, I didn't realize that it impacted in this type of a way.
Yeah. So for me, this journey began by having that exact exposure to some behavioral science in my early career. So just through luck, I was able to jump on a DISC course in my early career. And I realized I was one of the better performers in my team, but always sensed a frustration my manager had with me. And after doing some DISC training, I realized that my self-awareness was terrible. And the way I communicated and adapted, or particularly not adapted my communication, was terrible. And so after kind of learning and realizing that my boss was more analytical, I could adapt my communication. So when he said, "How are you doing, Damon?" I could say, "Hey, I'm 80% of my target. I think I'll finish on 120 at the end of a quarter and I need help with ABC. And as soon as I was able to understand my behavior and how it impacted others and adapt it, our relationship just got better. And I became obsessed with kind of coaching and development and set me on this path. But back in those days, that was just luck, me getting that exposure to DISC. And now it's no longer the case. It's actually very easy to roll out kind of solutions at scale to support people's careers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So for our listeners today that are going, how do I roll this out, or what does this look like? I just want to give a couple kind of quick tips of saying, yep, there's resources that you can use that are outsourced. Damon and I are both great resources for that. But there's also some things that you can do internally to create that coaching culture. And one of the ones that I love is really doing and looking at and saying, hey, are we in alignment on what we believe that the outcome of XYZ should be? So for example, Damon, if you and I were working together, and let's say that you're reporting to me, I may say, hey, Damon, what are your top 3 priorities right now? And I'm going to share the top 3 priorities that I currently have for you. And we compare those. And what we so often see is that we're not in alignment on what those priorities are, right? Then we can start to have a conversation around what that is and the behaviors that are specifically needed to get to those outcomes. So we're coaching, meaning we're asking questions to have individuals step into those answers themselves versus saying, hey, you did it wrong, do it this way.
Yeah, so that's where we want to be, but getting organizations there is the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that it's also the thought that it is a challenge versus just jumping in and saying, hey, I realize that the first step to getting there is actually just doing it.
Yeah. And so first of all, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where I get really excited now, because there almost is an explosion in tech and resources available to help companies get to that point where they're, creating that coaching culture and asking those types of questions and empowering, managers and VPs and individual contributors to kind of use those systems and tools.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think using, if we're looking at using systems and tools, some individuals and leaders are natural coaches. They have the knack for it, right? And others are going, okay, I need a little bit of help figuring this out. So one of the things I love about Predictive Index is there is a coaching guide based on the behaviors needed to step into a specific role. And with that being said, coaching is really all about those questions. And so if we're creating that coaching culture, yes, we can use technology to do it, but it's really about that personal relationship between the people and asking the questions and having the trust behind it for them to know that, I am in a safe environment and we have the same intention of my growth and XYZ outcome for the organization.
Yeah. And I'm going to put I'm going to move that into 3 tips if I can. I'm kind of guessing 3 is a good number, so I'm going to try and make 3 tips. So moving backwards a little, creating an organization with the coaching mindset is important. So recognizing that talent is critical for strategy execution. And once we can realize that, we can start, giving HR teams more teeth. We can empower them, to have more conversations around the talent. And once we can actually make HR more proactive and more strategic, we can start thinking about the next step is how do we integrate the solution? How do we execute a coaching culture? So I think that's the first part is at a very high level, is recognizing that how you approach talent has to be strategic and proactive. Once that's done, it's moving to the next point about how do we execute that. And there are so many solutions on the market. And I think, it's kind of exploded a little bit due to companies like BetterUp, and more of a focus on well-being and positive mindset and emotional intelligence. But there's a lot of solutions on the market which empower managers and teams to actually have these conversations. Whereas previously, we go back to you were dependent on an expensive consultants coming in and teaching. That's no longer the case. So once we have that organizational mindset of empowering teams to coach better, and we have a solution, the final stage, my point 3, is thinking about how can we kind of reinforce it and track it and keep it current. And there's also solutions now that help you do that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. So I love the 3 tips, especially looking at, all right, there's ways to do it. There's external solutions. We can also do it internally. And again, where's the easy button? And I think that's always a question that we ask is, hey, maybe I don't have a budget yet, or I'm not really sure I'm going to toe dip on this, so where do we start? So I love that. So as we definitely start to kind of land our plane here, what is a key takeaway, Damon, that you have for the executives that have listened into our conversation today?
I'll go back to that first tip, and that's just in making that talent conversation part of your scorecard, and making sure we think about it. Every business challenge is a people challenge, and rarely do we have the people on the scorecard. We look at new product launches, we look at revenue, we look at metrics and key goals, but is there a talent? Recognizing there's a talent metric on that scorecard to support for talent into that strategy execution. So, that always is my kind of default, is like making talent top of mind. And then I think you talked about something really interesting, and that's keeping it simple. I think if I'm going to predict something, I always think this industry is a little bit like the marketing industry 10 years ago or 15 years ago with the explosion of all this marketing tech. And I want to go back to something that you said, and that's keeping it simple. I kind of foresee there's lots of solutions. Like if we think about, that bucket of what it could be, we've got well-being, we've got reward and recognition, we've got coaching, we've got team cohesion, we've got, so many things here. And I think the next few years, we're going to see, a lot of exciting products out there. And so going back to what you said, is keeping it simple, is what's the one thing we can do, which is simple, cost effective, and we can actually make sure we see it through and not kind of lose interest. And there's plenty of options for that.
Right. And I think, when we look at keep it simple, one of the things, especially within a coaching culture, that I would always say is ensure you have alignment to open up the conversation. So, one thing to start with is just that really simple alignment conversation exercise that I talked about, and it doesn't have to be on goals. It could be on, hey, tell me how you think that conversation went. And then I'm going to share how I think that conversation went. And then we can chat about what do you think it would have looked like to meet this outcome? And did we meet the outcome through it? Right. And so, something simple is asking open-ended questions for sure.
Yeah. So I so much don't mind what it is. I'm more concerned about making it happen.
I agree.
Yeah. So for me, it's whatever it is, whether it's, looking at behavioral strengths and utilizing them more. I do an exercise where we look at your strengths, your behavioral strengths. We look at how you can use them more in your day-to-day, outside your day-to-day, and how can you progress towards these strengths in the future. So it's a great exercise, but it's like a gym membership. It's only as good as turning up and using it.
Right.
My big focus is really making sure is how can I embed that conversation across the organization and make sure it happens.
Yep.
And so that's I see the critical challenge for creating a coaching culture is the habitual nature for tracking and making sure that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we can go super simple with calendar invites, or we can do something a little bit more complicated with a tech tool like Ethos, where it is in a system where we can actually see, is the coaching culture happening, right? So, yep, I 100% agree. And so, to kind of take this tip down for both HR professionals and executives listening in today, to simplify it, is pick one thing you're going to work on from a coaching perspective, and then pick a method to ensure that it shows up on a weekly or monthly basis, so that everyone in the organization is doing the same thing, so that it builds that muscle memory and that it's actually happening. Because there's so many great ideas out there, but the issue is that if we're not doing them consistently, then they won't be happening. And as Damon's smiling, like, yeah, it's like a gym membership, Tracy.
Well, I love the fact you talk about Etho, because, for those of you who don't know, it's performance and team tracking software. So it's a platform where you can measure people, meetings, and progress against strategy. It's so exciting. But yeah, it's almost, it's exactly like a gym membership. It's I see so many solutions implemented and they fall flat. So anything you can do to make sure you commit and actually drive success through. Because sometimes it's not the solution, it's just the application execution, and Etho can help you there. But yeah, absolutely. And also that gym membership, you need some personal trainers floating about that gym. So within an organization, you need to get people going to the gym, you go using the machines, and you probably want some personal trainers popping along and helping people out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Damon, thank you so much for being with us again as we, chatted through creating that coaching culture, ensuring that we have the methods in place to do it, along with the support to do it, both from a tactical, let's make sure that it's actually happening, and then the personal trainer, the coaching and consulting that's happening as well. So with that, thank you so much for being with us this week. And of course, if you are looking for coaching, let's say you're in HR and you're looking for that HR coach to help you see what you can't see, we do have our HR coaching program that will be beginning next month as well. So please be sure to check that out, and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.